There are two moments in a father's life that he never forgets. The first is when he holds his daughter in his arms for the very first time. The second is when she walks away from him for the first time. I was blessed with one and broken by the other. My name is Richard Cole. I'm 68 years old and I have only one child, my daughter Amelia. She came into my life on a rainy October morning and immediately became the center of my entire world. After my wife passed away when Amelia was just 9 years old, it was always the two of us against the world. I packed her school lunches every morning. I learned how to braid her hair after watching the same YouTube tutorial nearly 50 times. I sat through dance recitals, science fairs, and parent-teacher meetings, always sitting in the front row with flowers in my hand. People often asked me why I never remarried. My answer was always simple. I already have everything God ever intended me to have, and that everything called me Dad. When Amelia turned 26, she fell in love with a young man named Ryan. At first, I wanted to like him. I truly did. Any man who could make my daughter smile automatically earned my respect, but the more I got to know him, the more uncomfortable I became. There was something about him that never felt right. He cared too much about appearances, too much about brands, too much about what people drove, what they wore, and which restaurants they visited. One evening during dinner, he laughed when our waiter accidentally spilled water on his shoes and said something that has stayed with me ever since. People can hide their personalities, he said, but they can never hide their social status. That sentence told me everything I needed to know about him. Unfortunately, love has a way of making intelligent people temporarily blind. When Amelia announced that she was going to marry Ryan, I asked her one simple question. "Are you absolutely sure?" She smiled and said, "Dad, he's the kindest man I've ever met." The irony of that sentence still makes me smile, sadly. I told her I wasn't ready to bless the marriage. It wasn't because I wanted to control her life. It was because I had spent 26 years protecting her from people who judged others by what they had instead of who they were. For the first time in her life, my daughter chose someone else over me. We argued. We cried. And eventually she married him without my blessing. I didn't attend the wedding. That decision cost me more sleepless nights than I care to admit. Over the next year, we spoke only twice. The silence between us slowly became heavier than the words we had exchanged. Then, 3 days before her 27th birthday, someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, Amelia immediately wrapped her arms around me and began crying. "Dad," she whispered, "please come to my birthday party." I smiled softly and shook my head. "I don't think that's a good idea, sweetheart." She wiped away her tears and held my hand exactly the way she used to when she was 5 years old. "If you don't come, I won't celebrate my birthday." "Amelia." "No cake, no party, nothing, I mean it." I laughed quietly. "You always were stubborn." "Because I learned from the best." Then she said something that completely melted my heart. "I don't care if you forgive me yet, Dad. I just want my father sitting in the same room with me on my birthday." For several moments I couldn't speak, because despite everything that had happened over the past year, she was still my little girl. And fathers have a weakness that the rest of the world will never understand. It's called a daughter asking for one more chance. Finally, I smiled and nodded. "All right, sweetheart, I'll be there." What I didn't know was that before the birthday cake was even brought to the table, I would be standing outside the front door, holding $100 in my hand, while my own son-in-law told me I wasn't dressed well enough to attend my daughter's birthday party. For the next 3 days, I found myself smiling more than I had in the past year. It felt strange. Sometimes when you spend so much time pretending that you're not hurt, you forget how much you miss the people you love. I must have opened my closet 6 or 7 times on the morning of Amelia's birthday. Not because I cared what anyone thought about my clothes, but because this wasn't just another dinner invitation. It was my daughter's birthday. The first birthday I would celebrate with her in over a year. Eventually, I chose what I always felt most comfortable wearing. A simple navy blue blazer, a white dress shirt, dark trousers, and the same silver watch my late wife had given me on our 20th wedding anniversary. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy, just me. Before leaving, I wrapped Amelia's birthday present myself. It was an old photo album I had spent several weeks putting together. Inside were pictures from every stage of her life: her first day of school, her high school graduation, the day she learned how to ride a bicycle, and the photograph we took when she was 12 years old after winning her school's art competition. On the very last page, I wrote just one sentence. "No matter how old you become, you'll always be my little girl." The birthday party was being held at an upscale country club on the outskirts of the city. As I drove into the parking lot, I couldn't help but smile when I saw colorful balloons outside the entrance. Amelia loved birthdays. Ever since she was 6 years old, she insisted that birthdays weren't about growing older. They were about reminding people how much they're loved. Funny enough, she was the one who taught me that. I picked up her gift and walked toward the entrance. Before I could take more than 2 steps inside, someone suddenly blocked my way. Ryan, my son-in-law. He stood there wearing an expensive tailored suit and a smile that immediately felt insincere. "Oh," he said while looking me up and down, "you actually came." I smiled politely. "Good evening, Ryan." His eyes immediately scanned my clothes. For several seconds, he didn't say a word. Then he laughed quietly. "You're planning to wear that inside?" I looked down at my blazer and smiled. "Yes, is there a problem?" He crossed his arms and lowered his voice. "Actually, there is." I could already tell where this conversation was heading. Tonight's guest list includes several important people from my business circle, investors, executives, and some of my family's closest friends. "That's wonderful." He shook his head before continuing. "You don't understand. This is a classy event." I smiled politely, which is why I wore my blazer. "No," he said while chuckling. "I mean classy." The security guard standing nearby immediately looked uncomfortable. Ryan reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill and waved it in front of me. "Look, let's not make this awkward." Then he pressed the money into my hand. "Go buy yourself something decent to wear and come back later." For several seconds, I simply stared at the bill resting in my palm, not because I was angry. Because I was genuinely speechless. This young man had absolutely no idea who I was, and for the first time in my life, I was grateful for that. "Ryan," I asked calmly, "does Amelia know you're doing this?" He immediately laughed. "Of course not. Why ruin her birthday over something so unnecessary?" Then he leaned closer and whispered something that instantly reminded me why I had opposed this marriage in the first place. "You know, I've always believed people should dress according to the room they're standing in." Interesting, because I had always believed people should behave according to the values their parents taught them. Before I could reply, I heard several guests whispering nearby. "Isn't that Amelia's father? He looks like an ordinary retired gentleman. Why didn't he wear something more appropriate?" I simply smiled. At 68 years old, I've learned that people's opinions reveal far more about them than they ever do about you. I quietly folded the $100 bill and placed it in my pocket. "Thank you," I said politely. Ryan looked surprised by my response. "So you'll go?" "No," I replied with a smile. "I'll stay right here." For several moments, we stood there in silence. Then suddenly, a luxury black government vehicle pulled up directly in front of the entrance. Ryan immediately smiled. "Perfect timing, my father's finally here." He quickly adjusted his tie and walked toward the vehicle. The driver opened the rear passenger door. An older gentleman in formal attire stepped out and immediately began walking toward the entrance. Then something unexpected happened. The moment his eyes landed on me, he froze in place. His face immediately changed, and before anyone could understand what was happening, he straightened his posture and said loudly enough for everyone standing nearby to hear, "Sir, I never imagined I would have the honor of meeting you here this evening." The entire entrance suddenly became silent. For nearly 10 seconds, nobody said a single word. Ryan stood frozen beside his father, looking back and forth between us, as though he had misheard what had just happened. "Dad?" he laughed nervously. "You know him?" His father looked at him in complete disbelief. "Know him," he repeated. "Half the police officers in this state know him." The guests immediately began whispering among themselves. Ryan's smile slowly disappeared. His father walked directly toward me and respectfully shook my hand. "Sir, I sincerely apologize if I interrupted your evening." I smiled politely. "Not at all, Robert. It's good to see you again." Then he looked at the $100 bill still resting in my hand. His expression immediately changed. "Sir, may I ask what happened here?" Before I could answer, Amelia came rushing toward the entrance after hearing the commotion. The moment she saw me standing outside, She smiled and hugged me tightly. "Dad, you came!" Then she noticed the uncomfortable expressions on everyone's faces. What happened? Nobody answered. Ryan lowered his head and quietly said, "I told him he wasn't dressed appropriately for the party." Amelia looked confused. "What?" "And," he continued nervously, "I gave him $100 to buy new clothes." For the first time that evening, I saw tears forming in my daughter's eyes. "You did what?" she whispered. Robert immediately turned toward his son. "Do you have any idea who this gentleman is?" Ryan slowly shook his head. "This man is one of the most respected officers I have ever served under. More importantly, he is your father-in-law, the man whose blessing you should have been trying to earn from the day you married his daughter." The entire room became silent. Ryan looked absolutely devastated. He walked toward me, his eyes filled with regret, and quietly said, "Sir, I'm ashamed of what I did. I judged you by your clothes without ever taking the time to know your character. Please forgive me." Then he did something I never expected. He apologized to my daughter and thanked me for coming despite everything that had happened. I smiled softly and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Ryan, I never cared whether you respected my position. I only wanted to know whether you respected my daughter." Tears rolled down Amelia's face as she hugged me once again. That night, I finally gave them my blessing. And for the first time in over a year, I stood beside my daughter as she cut her birthday cake. Because sometimes the greatest gift a father can give his child isn't his approval. It's a second chance.